My mom called me. Her voice, usually a steady anchor in my chaotic life, trembled. "We're leaving tomorrow," she said, each word a hammer blow. Then came the second, even more devastating pronouncement. "Your beach house and your car have been sold." One phone call, that's all it took for my entire world to shatter into a million irreparable pieces. I was 52 years old, and in a single breath, everything I had worked for, everything I thought was mine, vanished. Can you imagine that gut-wrenching feeling? The immediate, icy dread that steals your breath, twists your stomach, and leaves you reeling, searching for a solid surface that no longer exists? I had spent decades building my life, brick by agonizing brick, after a childhood that left me with more scars than memories. I'd poured every ounce of my being, every spare dime, into that little beach house on the Outer Banks, a sanctuary I'd earned with blood, sweat, and endless nights. It wasn't just a house, it was tangible proof of my resilience, a monument to the fact that I had, against all odds, made it. Then, that phone call. My own mother, the woman who was supposed to be my bedrock, had conspired with my estranged sister to systematically dismantle my life, piece by agonizing piece. They didn't just sell my property, they sold my peace of mind, my future, my very sense of security. The beach house, a place where the ocean breeze whispered promises of tranquility, was gone. My reliable Ford pickup, the one that had carried me through countless road trips and moving days, was gone. All without my knowledge, without my consent. Resentment began to simmer, a slow, toxic burn in my chest. It wasn't just about the money, though that was certainly a massive blow. It was the betrayal, the callous disregard for my autonomy, the sheer audacity of two people I had once loved, carving out my life from under me like vultures picking at a carcass. This wasn't some misunderstanding, this was a calculated, deliberate act of malice. For days I walked around in a fog, the world a blurry, indistinct canvas of pain. Sleep offered no escape, my dreams were haunted by the image of a sold sign planted firmly in the sandy front yard of my beloved house. The resentment festered, deepening into a raw, throbbing wound. How could they? How could my own family inflict such a wound? The question echoed in the hollow chambers of my heart, demanding an answer, demanding restitution. I remember staring at my reflection in the darkened window one night, my eyes hollow, my face etched with a pain I barely recognized. That's when the anger, a cold, hard stone, began to replace the sorrow. It solidified into something far more dangerous, something that would consume my every waking thought. It became an obsession. I would get it back. Not just the house, not just the truck, but my dignity, my agency, everything they had stolen. I would make them understand the depth of their transgression. But how do you fight against the people who know your deepest vulnerabilities, who can manipulate the system, because they were once on the inside? How do you claw back what was so ruthlessly taken by those who were supposed to protect you? The legal avenues felt like a maze designed to trap the desperate, and I was desperate. The cost alone would bankrupt me, and they knew it. They had counted on my defeat, on my despair. They had underestimated me. They had forgotten the fire that had forged me, the same fire that had helped me build that beach house from nothing. They believed they had won, that they had successfully erased my existence, leaving me stranded and broken. What they didn't realize was that they had only ignited a fuse that would lead to an explosion of reckoning, a confrontation they would never see coming. This isn't just a story about property, it's a story about power, about family, and about the lengths one woman will go to reclaim what is rightfully hers, even if it means tearing down everything she once held dear. This is the story of how I, a woman blindsided and betrayed, began a journey not of revenge, but of relentless, unwavering justice. And what I discovered along the way, about my family, about myself, and about the true cost of betrayal, will shock you. What happened next changed everything. The phone felt cold against my ear, a stark contrast to the sudden burning heat that flushed through my veins. My mother's voice, usually a comforting melody, had become a dull, flat instrument of destruction. "We're leaving tomorrow," she stated, her tone devoid of any discernible emotion. "Your beach house and your car have been sold." A choked gasp escaped my lips, but no sound followed. The world around me, once vibrant and full of promise, instantly dissolved into a dizzying kaleidoscope of disbelief. I stood frozen in the middle of my living room, the familiar scent of salt and sea air that usually permeated the space suddenly feeling like a cruel mockery. This wasn't just a house. It was the anchor of my existence, the manifestation of every sacrifice, every late night, every dream I had meticulously built over 2 decades. It was my sanctuary, my legacy, and the only place I had ever truly felt safe. My name is Evelyn Reed, and in that single shattering moment, the life I knew evaporated. I had poured every ounce of my being into building a successful career, clawing my way up from nothing, all so I could provide my parents with a comfortable retirement. I bought them their dream home, covered their medical bills, and sent them on lavish vacations. The beach house, my own slice of paradise, was the reward for my relentless effort, a tangible symbol of my hard-won independence. The vintage Mustang, a gift to myself after closing my biggest deal, represented freedom and the joy of simple pleasures. Now both were gone, not by some unforeseen disaster, but by the calculated, cold actions of the very people I had dedicated my life to supporting. My mother continued, her voice like a chisel chipping away at my sanity. "Your father and I decided it was for the best. We need the capital for our new venture." New venture? My mind reeled. They were nearly 70. What new venture could possibly justify such a betrayal? The words hung in the air, thick with an unspoken accusation, a dismissal of my entire being. It wasn't just the sale of property, it was the erasure of my identity, the obliteration of my trust. A cold dread began to coil in my stomach. This wasn't a sudden whim, it was a carefully orchestrated plan. I remembered the subtle shifts, the increasingly evasive answers, the way my father had started avoiding my calls in recent months. He had always been the more outwardly affectionate parent, but now, a chilling silence hung where his usual warmth had been. My mother, pragmatic and often distant, had become even more so, her conversations clipped, her visits rare. I had attributed it to their age, to the natural progression of life, never suspecting the insidious rot festering beneath the surface. The full weight of their deception crashed down on me. They hadn't asked. They hadn't consulted. They hadn't even given me a single warning. They had simply taken what was mine, what I had earned, and liquidated it without a second thought. My generosity, my love, my unwavering loyalty, all of it had been weaponized against me. I felt a visceral surge of betrayal, a profound sense of violation that transcended the financial loss. This was personal. This was a direct assault on my autonomy, my dreams, my very right to exist independently. But how? I finally managed to croak, my voice raw and unfamiliar. "How could you sell my property? I own it." A sigh, impatient and weary, echoed through the phone. "Evelyn, darling, we had power of attorney. You signed it years ago, remember? When you were so busy with your career, you asked us to handle everything." The memory hit me like a physical blow. Years ago, during a particularly grueling period at work, when I was traveling constantly and overwhelmed by paperwork, they had presented me with a stack of documents. They had assured me it was just routine financial management, a way to streamline things to help me out. I had trusted them implicitly, blindly. They were my parents, after all. Who would ever suspect their own flesh and blood of such calculated malice? The realization settled in my chest, a heavy, suffocating stone. This wasn't just theft. It was a meticulously planned ambush, executed under the guise of parental care. They had used my trust, my love, my own signature to strip me bare. The resentment, a simmering ember that had always existed beneath the surface of our relationship, now ignited into a raging inferno. It wasn't just about the house or the car anymore. It was about the fundamental breach of trust, the shattering of the most sacred bond. My parents, the people who were supposed to protect me, had become my predators. A chilling resolve began to crystallize within me. The shock gave way to a cold, hard anger, unlike anything I had ever experienced. They had taken everything, but they had also ignited something within me, a fire that would not be extinguished. This was not just a financial loss, it was a declaration of war. They had shown their true colors, and now it was time for me to show mine. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with emotional landmines, but one thing became terrifyingly clear. Evelyn Reed was about to embark on a journey of reckoning. There would be no turning back. The raw, cold fury that had initially seized me began to solidify into something far more dangerous: resolve. My parents, the people who had always preached the importance of family and loyalty, had just ripped away everything I had worked for, everything that defined my independence. Their new venture felt like a thinly veiled excuse, a flimsy curtain drawn over an act of pure, unadulterated selfishness. I stared at the phone, still clutched in my hand, as if it held the answers to their sudden, inexplicable cruelty. It didn't. Only their actions spoke, and they spoke volumes. I remembered the countless times I had bailed them out of financial scrapes, the medical bills I'd quietly paid, the extravagant gifts I'd showered upon them, always hoping to earn their genuine approval, their unconditional love. It now felt like I had been pouring water into a bottomless pit, a pit that had swallowed my efforts and then spit them back in my face, disguised as betrayal. The beach house, the vintage Mustang, these weren't just assets. They were extensions of my identity, symbols of my hard-won freedom after years of feeling beholden to their ever-increasing demands. Now, they were gone, vanished into the ether of my parents' insatiable greed. The initial shock gave way to a chilling clarity. This wasn't an oversight, a misunderstanding, or a lapse in judgment. This was calculated. This was deliberate. My mother's calm, almost clinical tone, as she delivered the news, replayed in my mind. There was no remorse, no hesitation, no hint of the emotional turmoil that should accompany such a devastating act against one's own child. It was as if they were discussing the weather, not dismantling my entire life. That realization, the sheer coldness of their actions, ignited a slow-burning fire within me, a fire that whispered promises of retribution. I paced my now empty living room, the echo of my footsteps a stark reminder of the void they had created. The scent of salt and sea, once a comfort, now felt like a ghost, a phantom limb of a life I no longer possessed. My mind raced, trying to piece together the fragments of their past behavior, searching for clues, for any indication that they were capable of such a profound betrayal. I thought of my father's increasingly distant demeanor, my mother's subtle manipulations, the way they always seemed to prioritize their own comforts above all else. It all clicked into place, a horrifying mosaic of self-interest and disregard. The next few days were a blur of numb disbelief and simmering rage. I tried calling them, my voice hoarse with a mixture of desperation and fury, but they never answered. Their phones went straight to voicemail, their silence a deafening testament to their evasion. It was a coward's retreat, a refusal to face the consequences of their actions. Each unanswered call fueled the growing inferno inside me. This wasn't just about the house or the car. It was about the years of emotional manipulation, the constant demands, the insidious way they had chipped away at my self-worth, always making me feel like I wasn't doing enough, being enough. This was the culmination of a lifetime of their subtle, yet relentless, emotional abuse. I remember staring at my reflection in the darkened window one night, my eyes burning with unshed tears and a fierce, unfamiliar glint. The woman looking back at me was no longer the dutiful daughter, the eager-to-please child who had always sought her parents' approval. That woman was gone, shattered by a betrayal so deep it had reshaped the very core of my being. In her place stood someone harder, someone colder, Someone who understood that the only way to heal from such a wound was to ensure that those who inflicted it felt the full weight of their actions. The new venture they spoke of became my obsession. I delved into online public records, scoured financial news, and even reached out to old family friends, discreetly probing for any information. My parents had always been secretive about their finances, always claiming poverty while living a life of quiet luxury, funded by my relentless work. But now, their secrecy felt less like a personal quirk and more like a deliberate smokescreen. I needed to understand their motivation, to find the cracks in their carefully constructed facade. One evening, while sifting through old photos, I stumbled upon a faded newspaper clipping my mother had kept hidden in a dusty box. It was an article from decades ago, detailing a real estate development project that had gone spectacularly wrong, bankrupting several investors. My father's name was mentioned, albeit briefly, as a minor participant. A cold dread settled in my stomach. Could this new venture be a desperate, last-ditch attempt to revive a past failure? A gamble so reckless they were willing to sacrifice their own daughter's future for it. The thought sent a fresh wave of revulsion through me. This wasn't just about money. It was about their pride, their ego, their refusal to acknowledge their own shortcomings. They had used me, not just as a financial resource, but as a shield against their own failures. The game had just changed, and I was ready to play. The cold fury that had gripped me in the initial shock began to crystallize into something far more dangerous, a meticulous, unyielding resolve. My mother's casual dismissal of my life's work, her audacious claim that selling my home and car was for the best, echoed in my ears, a constant, grating reminder of their profound disrespect. This wasn't just about the house, or the Mustang. It was about the fundamental breach of trust, the calculated demolition of my sense of security by the very people who were supposed to be my bedrock. They had treated me as an ATM, a resource to be exploited, and now, a disposable inconvenience. My first step was to untangle the web of their deception. I couldn't confront them yet. I needed information, leverage. My parents, particularly my father, had always been notoriously opaque about their finances, citing privacy and adult matters whenever I inquired. Now, those evasions felt less like boundaries and more like deliberate obfuscation. I started by meticulously reviewing every document I had: old tax returns, property deeds, bank statements, anything that might shed light on their financial dealings. It was a tedious, soul-crushing process, sifting through years of paperwork, but I was driven by a burning need to understand the true extent of their betrayal. The hours blurred into days, fueled by stale coffee and a growing sense of dread. I discovered discrepancies, small at first, then larger, more alarming ones. There were unexplained withdrawals from accounts I had set up for their expenses, transfers to unfamiliar entities, and a series of high-interest loans taken out in their names, none of which I had been aware of. The new venture my mother had so flippantly mentioned began to take shape, not as some legitimate business, but as a reckless gamble, a desperate attempt to recoup past losses. They had been bleeding money for years, and I, their unwitting benefactor, had been replenishing the coffers. The deeper I delved, the more the picture of their financial recklessness emerged. My parents had always presented themselves as financially prudent, almost frugal, but the reality was a stark contrast. They had invested in a series of increasingly dubious schemes, each one promising quick riches, each one ending in significant losses. The new venture wasn't new at all. It was just the latest iteration of their chronic inability to manage money. Only this time, they had decided to liquidate my assets to fund it. The audacity of it, the sheer entitlement, made my stomach churn. They weren't just careless, they were manipulative. One afternoon, buried under a mountain of documents, a name jumped out at me, the Phoenix Group. It was listed as the recipient of a substantial transfer from one of their accounts, a transfer that had occurred just weeks before my mother's phone call. A quick online search revealed the Phoenix Group to be a highly speculative real estate development company, notorious for high-risk, high-reward projects that often ended in spectacular failure. This wasn't a new venture. It was a last-ditch, all-or-nothing bet, and they had bet my future on it. They had gambled away my home, my car, my security, all on a pipe dream. The emotional impact was profound. The initial shock had given way to anger, and now, a cold, calculated rage. I had spent 2 decades building my life, painstakingly accumulating what I had, only for them to dismantle it in a single, selfish act. The house wasn't just a building. It was the embodiment of my independence, my hard-won success. The Mustang wasn't just a car, it was a symbol of joy, a reminder of the simple pleasures I allowed myself. They had taken both, not out of necessity, but out of a desperate self-serving delusion. The resentment I felt was a living thing, coiling in my gut, demanding an outlet. I knew then that I couldn't just mourn my losses. I had to act. My parents had made their move, and now it was my turn. The game had truly begun, and I was no longer a pawn. I was a player, and I intended to win. The next step was clear. I needed to understand the Phoenix Group inside and out. I needed to know their weaknesses, their vulnerabilities, every single detail that could give me an edge. They had underestimated me, assuming I would simply accept their decree. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. My focus narrowed, my resolve hardened. This wasn't about getting my things back. It was about making them understand the true cost of their betrayal. It was about justice, and I was going to deliver it, one calculated move at a time. The meticulously compiled dossier on they sat on my coffee table, a physical manifestation of my obsession. Every transaction, every shady deal, every whispered rumor I had unearthed over the past weeks was laid bare. Their new venture wasn't some harmless retirement hobby. It was a sophisticated real estate scam, preying on vulnerable seniors, leveraging their assets for quick cash, then leaving them high and dry. My beach house and car were just 2 small pieces of a much larger, more insidious puzzle. My initial anger had morphed into a cold, calculated fury. This wasn't just about my personal loss anymore. It was about the dozens, perhaps hundreds of lives they were systematically destroying. The emotional arc of my journey had shifted from personal vengeance to a broader quest for justice. I wasn't just a victim, I was an avenger. My focus narrowed, every waking moment consumed by the intricate dance of exposing their deceit. Sleep became a luxury I rarely afforded, fueled instead by strong coffee and an unyielding resolve. I remembered the day I found the first real lead. It was buried deep within a public records database, a seemingly innocuous property transfer involving a shell corporation. The name of the corporation, however, was a subtle variation of a company they had once mentioned in passing years ago when they thought I wasn't listening. A tiny detail, easily overlooked, but it was the thread I needed to pull. That single thread unraveled a tapestry of fraud, revealing a pattern of identical transactions across state lines. The sheer audacity of their operation was staggering. The next few weeks were a blur of late-night calls, clandestine meetings with disgruntled former associates of they, and hours spent poring over financial statements. I learned to navigate the dark underbelly of corporate espionage, a world far removed from the polished boardrooms I was accustomed to. I even hired a discreet private investigator, a grizzled ex-cop named Miller, who had a knack for unearthing secrets from the most unlikely places. He confirmed my suspicions, adding crucial pieces to the puzzle I was building. He found the victims, the elderly couples who had lost their life savings, their homes, their dignity. Their stories fueled my fire, transforming my personal vendetta into a righteous crusade. One afternoon, Miller called me, his voice grim. "They've just liquidated another property, Evelyn. A retirement community in Florida. 80 units. The residents have no idea." A chill ran down my spine. The scale of their cruelty was breathtaking. This wasn't just a betrayal. It was a crime against humanity, or at least against the most vulnerable among us. The anger flared anew, hotter than ever, but it was tempered by a steely determination. I had to stop them. My strategy began to crystallize. I wouldn't just expose them, I would dismantle their entire operation, piece by painstaking piece. I knew their weaknesses, their vulnerabilities. They were arrogant, overconfident, believing their intricate web of shell companies and offshore accounts was impenetrable. That arrogance would be their downfall. I started by anonymously leaking snippets of information to a financial journalist I knew, a tenacious woman named Sarah Chen, who had a reputation for breaking big stories. I fed her just enough to pique her interest, to get her digging, without revealing my hand. Then came the meeting with the lead prosecutor. I presented my findings, a meticulously organized binder overflowing with evidence, bank statements, property deeds, shell company registrations, and the heartbreaking testimonials of their victims. The prosecutor, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Miss Davies, listened intently, her expression unreadable. When I finished, the room was silent. She picked up the binder, flipped through a few pages, then looked at me, her eyes piercing. "This is compelling, Ms. Reed. Very compelling. But proving intent, that's the hard part, I knew that. Proving they intended to defraud, rather than simply making poor business decisions, would be the linchpin of any case. That's where the emotional component came in. I had to show the pattern, the deliberate targeting of the vulnerable, the systematic nature of their betrayal. I had to make it personal for the jury, should it come to that. The next phase involved carefully orchestrated public pressure. I started reaching out to the victims, one by one, cautiously at first, then more openly as they realized I was on their side. Their stories, once whispered in shame, now found a voice through me. I helped them organize, to find strength in numbers. We planned a press conference, a collective declaration of their suffering, a direct challenge to the facade of respectability they had so carefully constructed. This wasn't just about legal action, it was about public humiliation, about stripping away their carefully cultivated image. I wanted the world to see them for who they truly were, predators in tailored suits. The day of the press conference dawned, crisp and clear. The air crackled with anticipation, a mix of fear and defiance. I stood beside the victims, a united front against a common enemy. The cameras flashed, the microphones bristled, and the questions began to fly. Each story shared, each tear shed, chipped away at the wall they had built around themselves. Their names, once whispered in hushed tones, were now shouted by the media, plastered across headlines. The tide was turning. The phone calls from their lawyers started almost immediately, frantic and accusatory. They were rattled. My calculated moves were working. The net was closing in. And the frantic calls from their lawyers confirmed it. They were rattled, their carefully constructed facade of respectability beginning to crack under the relentless pressure. I had anticipated this. Every move I made was calculated, every leak precisely timed to inflict maximum damage. This wasn't just about reclaiming what was mine. It was about exposing the truth of who they truly were. I received a call from a major news outlet, wanting an exclusive interview. This was it, the moment I had been planning for. I meticulously prepared, rehearsing my answers, ensuring every word conveyed the raw betrayal I had endured. When the cameras rolled, I spoke with a quiet intensity, recounting the years of sacrifice, the unwavering support I had given them, and the brutal, callous way they had stripped me of everything I held dear. I didn't yell or scream. My voice remained steady, laced with a controlled grief that resonated far more powerfully than any outburst could have. I presented the irrefutable evidence, the bank statements, the forged documents, the emails detailing their new venture, a ludicrous high-risk scheme that would have undoubtedly bankrupted them, and by extension, me. The anchor, visibly moved, asked them for a response on live television. Their stammering, defensive denial only served to further condemn them in the eyes of the public. The following days were a whirlwind. Social media exploded with support for me and outrage against them. Their carefully cultivated image as benevolent, struggling elders crumbled into dust. Their so-called new venture was dead in the water, their partners pulling out amidst the scandal. The phone calls from their lawyers became even more desperate, laced with thinly veiled threats, and then, finally, pleas. They wanted to settle. They wanted to make it all go away. But I wasn't interested in making it go away. I wanted justice, not just for myself, but for every other person they had undoubtedly exploited throughout their lives. My legal team, invigorated by the public outcry, pushed harder. We filed a civil suit for fraud, emotional distress, and unjust enrichment. The evidence was overwhelming. Depositions began, and I sat across from them, my gaze unwavering as they squirmed under the weight of their own lies. My mother, once so imperious, now looked frail and defeated, her eyes darting away from mine. My father, usually so boisterous, was reduced to mumbled, incoherent responses. The power dynamic had shifted entirely. I was no longer the naive daughter. I was the architect of their downfall, and they knew it. During one particularly grueling deposition, my mother broke down. She confessed, not to me, but to the lawyers, to the court recorder, to the empty air in the room. She admitted to the years of financial manipulation, the secret accounts, the calculated deception. She spoke of a deep-seated resentment, a belief that I owed them everything, that my success was theirs to claim. It was a chilling revelation, confirming my deepest fears and validating every ounce of pain I had felt. The raw truth of their betrayal, laid bare, was almost unbearable. It wasn't just about money. It was about a profound, twisted sense of entitlement. The judge's ruling came swiftly and decisively. They were ordered to return my beach house and my car, along with substantial financial compensation for damages and legal fees. The new venture funds, which had been frozen, were largely awarded to me. It was a complete victory, a public vindication. The headlines screamed of justice served, of a daughter reclaiming her life from manipulative parents. I stood on the courthouse steps, the cool air a stark contrast to the burning intensity within me. The cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, but I felt a strange sense of calm. The fight was over. The battle had been won. Walking back into my beach house felt surreal. The familiar scent of salt and sea air, once a cruel mockery, now embraced me like a long-lost friend. The vintage Mustang gleamed in the driveway, a symbol of freedom I had thought forever lost. I touched the cool, smooth surfaces, ran my hand over the familiar textures, a profound sense of relief washing over me. This was mine again. Every corner held a memory, not of betrayal, but of hard work, of dreams realized. The house felt lighter, cleansed of the insidious presence that had once threatened to consume it. The emotional cost had been immense. The relationship with my parents, fractured beyond repair, was a gaping wound. But there was also a quiet strength, a newfound resilience that had emerged from the ashes of my shattered trust. I had faced my deepest fears, confronted the people who had hurt me most, and emerged victorious. The bitterness that had once consumed me had begun to recede, replaced by a quiet sense of peace. I had sought justice, and I had found it. The closure wasn't sweet, not entirely, but it was real. It was the truth, and the truth, no matter how painful, had finally set me free. The quiet sense of peace that had begun to settle over me wasn't a surrender, it was a strategic withdrawal. I had won the battle for my own sanity, but the war for true justice, the kind that reshaped futures, was far from over. My mother and father, oblivious in their new venture, believed they had simply moved on. They thought their betrayal was a closed chapter, a neat little transaction that had faded into the past. They had no idea I was just beginning to write the epilogue. My first move was methodical, almost surgical. I didn't want to burn down their world. I wanted to dismantle it, piece by agonizing piece, exactly as they had dismantled mine. I started with the new venture they had so glibly mentioned. A quick search of public records, a few discreet inquiries through old business contacts, and the picture began to form. They had invested heavily in a dubious, high-risk real estate scheme in Florida, a development promising impossible returns. It reeked of desperation, a last-ditch effort to recapture a youth and fortune they had never truly earned. The irony wasn't lost on me. They had stolen my future to gamble on their own, and the house of cards was already swaying. I didn't call them, didn't send a single accusatory text. Instead, I used the very skills I had honed building my own empire. I anonymously leaked information to a few key financial journalists, highlighting the scheme's predatory nature, its flimsy legal foundations, and the history of its shady developers. I didn't expose my parents directly. I simply shined a spotlight on the rotten core of their chosen investment. The articles spread like wildfire, igniting a flurry of investigations. Suddenly, their new venture was under intense scrutiny, their capital frozen, their dreams turning to ash. The phone calls started soon after. Not to me, but to my old friends, distant relatives, anyone who might still be in contact with me. Their voices, once so confident, were now laced with panic. They needed my help, my expertise, my connections. They needed the very person they had discarded. I let the calls go to voicemail, listening to their increasingly desperate pleas. It was a symphony of their undoing, and I savored every discordant note. The climax arrived not with a bang, but with a whimper. It was a Tuesday morning, a perfectly ordinary day, when my phone finally rang with an unknown number. I recognized the area code, Florida. I answered, a quiet satisfaction settling in my chest. It was my mother, her voice thin and reedy, devoid of its usual manufactured composure. "Evelyn," she choked out, we've lost everything. The investment, it was a scam. We're ruined." I said nothing, letting her words hang in the air, a testament to the bitter harvest they had sown. She continued, a torrent of self-pity and blame, but not once did she apologize for what they had done to me. Not once did she acknowledge the beach house, the car, the decades of my unwavering support. Her concern was solely for herself, for their lost future, for the consequences of their own avarice. "We have nowhere to go," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Your father, he's had a heart scare. We just need somewhere to stay, just for a little while, until we figure things out." The silence stretched, heavy and profound. This was it, the moment I had dreamed of, the ultimate vindication. They were broken, destitute, coming to me, the daughter they had robbed. But as I listened to her plea, a strange wave washed over me. It wasn't triumph, not exactly. It was emptiness. The revenge, meticulously planned and executed, had delivered its promised result, yet the satisfaction was fleeting, a hollow echo in a vast chamber. "Mother," I finally said, my voice calm, steady, and utterly devoid of emotion. "I'm sorry to hear that, I truly am." I paused, letting the words sink in. "However, I no longer have a beach house, and my car, the one you sold, was never replaced. I'm afraid I have nothing to offer you." I heard her sharp intake of breath, a sudden, stunned silence on the other end. She had expected anger, perhaps, or even a grudging acceptance. But not this cold, dispassionate detachment. This was worse than fury, it was indifference. But "Evelyn," she stammered, "we're your parents. You made your choices," I replied, my voice unwavering. "And I made mine. Goodbye, Mother." I hung up, the click of the phone final, definitive. There was no surge of elation, no triumphant cheer. Only a quiet exhale. The bitterness had truly receded now, replaced not by joy, but by a profound sense of closure. I hadn't just sought justice. I had redefined my relationship with my past. They had taken my house, my car, my perceived security. But in doing so, they had inadvertently given me something far more valuable: freedom. Freedom from their expectations, freedom from their manipulations, freedom to build a future unburdened by their shadow. The truth, in all its painful glory, had set me free, not just from them, but from the need for their approval, their love, or their presence in my life. The chapter was closed, truly and irrevocably. and for the first time in a long time, I felt truly, completely, at peace. The silence in the room felt heavier than any spoken accusation. My mother, usually so composed, looked like a statue carved from ash, her eyes fixed on the damning documents scattered across the polished table. My stepfather, Mark, had gone from blustering indignation to a pale, sweating mess, his usual swagger completely deflated. The lawyer, Mr. Henderson, cleared his throat, breaking the suffocating quiet. He simply said, "The evidence is conclusive. Your mother's signature was forged. The power of attorney was obtained under false pretenses. The sales of the house and car are null and void." A wave of something akin to relief, but tinged with a deep, weary sadness washed over me. This wasn't a victory dance. It was the quiet dismantling of a lifetime of carefully constructed lies. My mother finally lifted her gaze, not to me, but to Mark. Her voice when it came was a brittle whisper. You did this? To me? To our daughter?" The betrayal in her eyes was raw, unfiltered. It was the moment the dam broke. Not just for her, but for me too. All those years of being dismissed, of being told I was dramatic, overly sensitive, suddenly evaporated in the harsh light of undeniable truth. Mark tried to stammer out an excuse. Something about protecting her. About financial difficulties. But the words withered on his lips. Mr. Henderson calmly laid out the legal repercussions: fraud, elder abuse, grand theft. The terms hung in the air like an executioner's pronouncement. Mark's face crumpled. He was no longer the slick, charming man who had charmed his way into my mother's life, and then systematically dismantled mine. He was just a pathetic, cornered cheat. My mother, to my surprise, didn't scream or rage. She simply stood up, her movements slow and deliberate, as if each step was an immense effort. She walked over to Mark, looked at him with an expression I had never seen before, a blend of profound disappointment and cold fury. And then, without a word, she slapped him. The sound echoed through the silent office. It wasn't a dramatic movie-style slap. It was a quiet, definitive thud, loaded with years of unspoken resentment and shattered trust. "Get out," she said, her voice low but firm. "Get out of my life. Get out of my house. I never want to see you again." He tried to protest, to beg, but she just turned her back. Mr. Henderson efficiently escorted him out, leaving my mother and me alone in the room. The air was thick with unspoken emotions. I looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw not the woman who had enabled my stepfather's cruelty, but a woman who had just had her entire world shattered, who had been profoundly betrayed by the person she trusted most. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice cracking, tears finally welling in her eyes. "I'm so incredibly sorry, my darling. I should have listened. I should have seen it. The anger, the resentment, the burning need for revenge that had fueled me for so long began to recede, replaced by a profound weariness. It wasn't a sudden forgiveness, but a recognition of shared pain. She was hurting, truly hurting. And for the first time in years, I saw her not as an adversary, but as my mother, a victim of the same manipulative monster. We sat there for a long time, not speaking, just existing in the aftermath. The legal battle would be long, messy, and painful. Mark would face the consequences of his actions. My beach house and car would eventually be returned to my name. But the real victory wasn't in the legal triumph. It was in the quiet, fragile reconnection with my mother. The road ahead was uncertain. Trust, once broken, is not easily mended. But as I walked out of that lawyer's office, the setting sun painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, I felt a lightness I hadn't known in years. The obsession had lifted. The justice had been served. And while the closure was bittersweet, tinged with the scars of betrayal, it was closure nonetheless. I had found my way back, not just to my property, but to a semblance of peace, and perhaps to a new beginning with the one person who truly mattered. The fight was over. Now it was time to heal.